This video is about the murder of small children, so viewer discretion is strongly advised. As part of this video, I will be visiting a crime scene location as well as two of the final resting places. How many people recognise these faces? I can't imagine that there are many of us that don't instantly know who they are and what they did, even though it happened over 50 years ago. The Moors murders, the horror of which has been etched into our collective minds and passed on to today's generation. Now this face. How many recognise him? I'm sure there are some that do, especially if you are interested in true crime. But many people don't, or at least they don't get the same jarring sensation from looking at this photograph as they do from looking into the bottomless and soulless eyes of Brady and Hindley. This is Raymond Morris. At almost exactly the same time as Hindley and Brady were preying upon children in Manchester in the 60s, murdering them and burying them on Saddleworth Moor, Raymond Morris was committing almost identical crimes in the Walsall area of the Midlands. He lured children between the ages of 5 and 7 into his car, murdering them and dumping them at Cannock Chase in Staffordshire. 3 little girls were killed by this monster, and yet the crimes never burned themselves into the consciousness of the nation the way the Moors murders have. This is their story. Cannock Chase is situated in the county of Staffordshire in England. It's referred to locally as the Chase, and it's considered an area of outstanding beauty. It's an area of both forest and countryside, popular for walks and days out with the family. It has a visitors centre, and there's lots going on for people to do when they come. In the 1960s, it became the scene of some of the most awful child murders in England. Between 1965 and 1967, it would be Raymond Morris's place of choice for the murder and disposal of the bodies of the 3 little girls he assaulted and killed. His youngest victim was only 5 years old. Raymond Morris was an evil predator who lured small girls into his car under various pretexts that were designed to resonate with little children. He took advantage of whatever he could to allow a child's guard to drop long enough for him to be able to get them into his car. During his reign of terror, his crimes were referred to as the Cannock Chase Murders, or the Babes in the Ditch Murders. Before he was caught, he was referred to as either the A34 killer, due to the murders being located near this road, or, more suitably, the Monster of Cannock Chase. Before the first murder, there was Julia Taylor, who at 9 years old in 1964 almost died at the hands of Morris. It was 9 p.m. on the run-up to Christmas on December the 2nd, when Raymond Morris lured the young girl into his car by telling her he was Uncle Len and a friend of her mum's. He told her he was here to take her to her aunt's house to collect some Christmas presents. Julia, who was a trusting 9-year-old and excited by the thought of presents, clambered into his car beside him. He drove her to some slag heaps near the mining village of Bentley, where he assaulted her, strangled her, and then threw her from the car into a ditch. It was raining hard that night, and it's nothing short of a miracle that a passing cyclist heard her weak sobbing and found her before she froze to death. As an adult, Julia has recounted her story, and she was able to point Morris out in court when she was in her early teens. There is no doubt in my mind that Morris thought he had killed her when he threw her from his vehicle. On the afternoon of September the 8th, 1965, 6-year-old Margaret Reynolds disappeared from near to her home in Aston, Birmingham. She would usually walk to school and come home for her lunch in the middle of the day and then walk back again. That day was like no other. She'd saw her sister and then she'd set off again for her afternoon lessons. On this day, however, she wasn't home at the usual time at the end of the day. It didn't take long for her parents to discover that she'd never been back to school after having her lunch. They reported her missing. At this time, 160 police questioned over 25,000 people. 200 posters were put up all around the local area. There were searches within an 8-mile radius of Aston, but Margaret had vanished without a trace. Just over 3 months later, on the afternoon of December the 30th, 5-year-old Diana Tift disappeared from a street close to where she lived in Walsall. She had last been seen at 2 p.m. outside her grandma's house. She'd been carrying a plastic pink handbag, one of her Christmas presents. By 7 p.m, she had been reported missing. Like Margaret before her, she had vanished without a trace. 2,000 people joined in the search for her, and a local councillor put up a reward. It was on January the 2nd, only 3 days later, that over 500 West Midlands police had been assigned to the case. It was on January the 12th, 1966, that a man out hunting made a horrifying discovery. He was out at Manstey Gully near Cannock Chase and stumbled upon the bodies of Margaret Reynolds and Diana Tift. They were lying one on top of the other in a waterlogged ditch. 5-year-old Diana had been suffocated with the hood of her anorak. It wasn't possible to determine a cause of death for Margaret due to the fact that she'd been lying there for 4 months. We've just driven along Manstey Lane in Staffordshire on the edge of Cannock Chase. It's a narrow road with regular pull-ins to allow 2 cars to pass each other. On either side there are cornfields and farmland. This is the road that Morris travelled along with Margaret Reynolds and Diana Tift. Where we've pulled over there is a gate. It takes us a few moments to locate the place where Margaret and Diana were found. That's because the gully isn't immediately visible from the road, and would explain why little Margaret Reynolds lay undiscovered for so long. Once the undergrowth is pushed to the side, you can see the gully, a slight drop and an area where he was able to leave the bodies. As it was winter time, the gully was full of water. It's quite horrifying to stand in this spot over 50 years later, after these awful crimes, and know that murdered children lay there just out of the sight of motorists that must have driven past. The horror felt by the man who discovered them can barely be imagined. Despite the scale of the investigation, police were drawing blanks and hitting walls, and by the summer the case was already growing cold. They had by now come up with a future plan for any reports of missing children, in the hopes that it would prevent another murder and apprehend the killer. This involved setting up road closures and roadblocks, and a police presence on Cannock Chase in the event that a child was reported missing. Unfortunately, this wasn't enough to save the life of 7-year-old Christine Darby, despite her getting into Morris's car in front of her 2 friends and her disappearance being reported immediately. It was August 19th, and Christine was playing in the street with her 2 friends. It would have been the school holidays and a carefree time for small children. Christine happily got into Morris's car when he asked her to show him where a nearby road was. Christine's family didn't own a car, and she was excited at the prospect of a quick ride in one. Her little friends watched in fear as the car took off at great speed in the opposite direction of where it was meant to be going. They wasted no time in running and telling Christine's mum. The car had been heading towards Cannock Chase. The roadblocks and closures were implemented, but Morris's eluded capture. Witnesses even came forward to say that they'd seen a car matching the same description as described by the girls heading to Cannock Chase with a young girl in the passenger seat. There was a massive search involving 300 police officers from 3 separate forces as well as soldiers from nearby Staffordshire Regiment. 24,000 posters bearing Christine's picture went up everywhere. There wouldn't have been anyone in the local area who didn't know what she looked like or what had happened. It made no difference in the end. 3 days after she was snatched, on August the 22nd, a soldier found Christine's naked body in a cluster of trees on Cannock Chase. she had been suffocated. Her body was only a mile away from where Margaret and Diana had been found. Christine Darby's little friends were able to supply the police with key evidence that would narrow down the search for the killer. They were able to describe his car and also provide invaluable information about the way he pronounced the road that he was looking for. The man used local words, and the police knew that their killer came from the Walsall area. An identikit photograph was produced and circulated. On November 4th, 1968, Morris attempted to abduct 10-year-old Margaret Alton, who he had tried to lure with the prospect of fireworks. It was the day before Guy Fawkes Night, bonfire night in England. Margaret had initially approached the car, but had soon noticed that there were no fireworks in it. She became fearful and resisted, prompting Morris to try and drag her into the vehicle. Luckily, a passer-by was there to witness what was happening. Morris panicked and fled. Raymond Morris was finally arrested on his way to work on November 15th, 1968, only 11 days after a failed attempt to snatch 10-year-old Margaret Alton. At this time, police had been in the process of re-interviewing men who had weak alibis, and he came into that category. The police considered someone who only had their wife as their alibi to be worthy of a re-interview. Raymond Morris was such a man. It turned out his wife had misled the police about his movements because she didn't believe he could possibly be the one to commit such dreadful crimes. Upon his arrest, police also discovered photographs that showed Morris abusing his niece. Further details emerged from his brothers that he talked about sick, violent fantasies. His first wife revealed that he had been controlling and abusive. It also transpired that Raymond Morris lived in flats right opposite the police station. He had literally been right under their noses all along. Raymond Morris was only charged with the murder of Christine Darby and the attempted abduction of Margaret Alton and indecent assault against his 5-year-old niece. There wasn't enough evidence to charge him for the murders of Margaret Reynolds and Diana Tift, but it's widely believed that he was responsible. He pled not guilty to murder and the attempted abduction, but he did plead guilty to the assault against his niece. His own wife testified against him in court. On February the 18th, 1965, it took a jury just 2 hours to find him guilty. The judge at the time said, "There must be many mothers whose hearts will beat more lightly as a result of this verdict." Morris showed no emotion. He was sentenced to life in prison. He died in prison on March the 11th, 2014, at the age of 84. He never admitted his guilt, and he never showed any remorse. And here we are now approaching the final resting place of Diana Joy Tift. Beneath this tree. Final resting place. In loving memory of Diana Joy Tift, born March the 18th, 1960. Died tragically December 30th, 1965. A ray of sunshine came and went, a beautiful flower only lent. Looks like lots of little things left here, other family members buried here. Looks like her dad and her mum. Of course, she was found with Margaret. Margaret was killed first, Diana second, and they were found together in Manstey Gully, which we've visited. We still haven't been able to find the grave of Margaret yet. Such a little girl, only 5 years old. Just after Christmas. Really, really sad. Rest in peace. So this is the cemetery and the final resting place of Christine and Darby. Just 7.5 years old, murdered by Raymond Morris in 1967. It's like the family don't want people to leave anything, any gifts on the grave, and they do tend to it themselves. Horribly, horribly sad. Horribly sad.